Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are you who do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for you shall be filled. Blessed are those who are merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. And blessed are those who are mourners, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are those who are pure in heart, for they shall see God. And blessed are you who are the peacemakers, for you shall be called the children of God. And blessed are you who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for yours is the kingdom of heaven.
Good morning and welcome one more time. My name is Dirk, preaching pastor here at Encounter, and we are in part 3 of a series around here we're calling Kingdom Come. As a run-up to Christmas, the birth of Christ, we're celebrating the coming of a king, and that king also brings with him a kingdom. And we're learning through the Sermon on the Mount of how to live in the kingdom that king brought. Just to start us off today, we're going to be talking about anxiety. We're going to be talking about fears and worries. So how many of you have something that's on your mind, something that you're worried about, even like as I'm saying this? Anybody who's worried about anything, right? And for those of you who didn't put up your hand, is it possible you're worried about what people next to you are thinking of you if you raise your hand? Because we all have something that keeps us up at night, something that's on our minds and hearts, something that makes us worry. And so it's just kind of an easy question to start us off. Like, what is it that you're worried about? If you had a worry box, what would you put in that box, in that worry box? Maybe the thing that you're worried about is like a test or an exam coming up. Maybe you're worried about finishing off a paper that probably should have been done last week. Maybe you're worried about a course grade. You're worried about what you're going to do after graduation. You're worried about a job or career, or making the right moves or avoiding the missteps in order to not to fall down or fall into place. You're worried about whether you should be staying at home or worried about working. You're worried about paying the rent or paying the bills. You're worried about whether you should rent or buy. You're worried about moving in with roommates and who they should be. You're worried about everything going on in your life all of the time. You're worried about saving up a little bit of money in order to pay off debt. You're worried about stuff. And so that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the worries that all of us carry with us with all of the time. Okay, now as we kind of get into this, it was just like a quick story about one of the things that a lot of us parents worry about the most is our kids. I had an experience a little while ago. I was talking to somebody who was in an advanced life stage than I am, and I was telling him, what's going on. I'm like, hey, I'm a new dad, I recently had a baby. My wife mostly did all the heavy lifting on that part of things, but I've got this kid at home, and I said, okay, so this is a strange experience for me. She recently, the baby, not the wife, started sleeping through the night, like the whole way. All right, and I thought, this is something that I looked forward to my whole life, to this point. I mean, the last 12 weeks, 15 weeks, however long it was, she figured it out pretty quickly. But oh man, I wanted this thing so badly. And then when it finally happened, I spent the whole night worried if there was something terrible that happened, or worried about my little baby daughter in the next room over, that I couldn't even enjoy the night's sleep that I was supposed to be getting. This thing that I wanted to happen so much, when it finally happened, I couldn't even enjoy it because the worry that I had just robbed me of all that joy, so that she was sleeping in the other room and now I was not. And I said, I really stepped in it, right? And I said, how great it would be to be in your shoes, in your life stage, where you don't have to worry about your kids anymore. And he kind of did one of these, and he leaned up close, and I'm like, I think I may have said the wrong thing. And he goes, Dirk, lowers his voice, right? He goes, I am 59 years old, and my kids haven't lived under my roof in over a decade. And I am telling you that even now, every siren that I hear after 1 a.m. is about my kids. You're not going to stop worrying about them. And I thought, thank you for putting that wet blanket on all of my hopes and dreams and aspirations. You've just ruined my life from now on. But I think he was right. We have so much worry and anxiety, so much plaguing our lives all of the time. What if we could suspend reality? What if we could do the impossible, even the miraculous, and we could find a way not to worry anymore? What if there was such a way to live our lives so that we don't lose another hour or another minute of sleep or another hour or a day or a week of our lives over to worry anymore? Chances are you'd probably say, that's impossible, that'd be a miracle. Chances are you'd probably say something like, that would be a whole nother world to me if I could just lose the worry part of my life. And you're exactly right. It would be another world. But that's what we're talking about in this series, Kingdom Come. That when we give our lives over to the King and when we more fully live in his kingdom, it's like we are living in a whole nother world. It's like we're living the impossible. We're living in the miraculous. We're living in the kingdom of the greatest King that the world has ever seen, King Jesus. All right, let's figure out how we're gonna live into this world, because Jesus, he did teach us about living without worry, and he taught us that in the Sermon on the Mount. So let's go there right now. Matthew chapter 6 is where we're gonna go. There's Bibles under the chairs in front of you. Also, the words are on the screen behind me. You can follow along either way, or a phone or your own Bible, whatever you brought, however you want to follow along. It's great. While you're flipping to it or finding the web page or whatever, I kind of want to set things up. Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount now, he's not just going to tell us, just stop worrying, right? Just don't worry about worry. He's not going to just do that. He's not going to leave us there. It's better than that. He's actually going to give us a way, a strategy not to worry, to be free from that entirely. So let's go there. It's Matthew chapter 6, and we're going to pick it up in verse 25 with these insightful words. So, therefore, he says, I tell you, do not worry. Here's a little pro tip, a little gem for life. Whenever you come, and for your Bible reading on your own, hopefully you read the Bible on your own. Whenever you come to a therefore, wait for it, you got to ask yourself, what's it there for? All right? That was good, right? 3 years and $60,000 on seminary, and that's my takeaway. I did it so you don't have to, okay? Jesus, he starts out, therefore, don't worry, therefore do not worry. He can say this. It's important to know because he had just been talking about storing up treasures. And now I think because the there is there for this reason, he's connecting these two ideas. He just finished his teaching. He goes, hey, for what it's worth, and I think it's simple enough, consider not storing up treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal, he says. Instead, store up treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not, in fact, cannot break in and steal. I mean, it's a simple point on the outside of it, right? Because you look at this and it's like, isn't it better to make investments in what you can't lose than investments in what you couldn't keep anyway, right? And in fact, Jesus is he's a rabbi, he's a teacher. He's not the only rabbi, he's not the only teacher in ancient Israel at the time. In fact, at least when Jesus started his ministry, there was another rabbi named Rabbi Hillel who was actually much more well-known in ancient Israel at the time than Jesus was as a rabbi with a bigger following. And he said, Rabbi Hillel said something very similar on the topic of worry. And he just, human observation that Rabbi Hillel made. And he said, I've just noticed that it seems like when people have more stuff, have more anything, they end up caring more about that. And maybe they're related at some point. Maybe the simple fact that you have more, it demands that you care more and that you have more to worry about. And so when Jesus starts off this therefore, I tell you, do not worry, I think it's probably at least kind of on the outside of things to say, hey, maybe just a quick, easy, like a quick cut kind of way to reduce the amount of worry is to like reduce the amount of stuff, right? That you just reduce the amount of stuff and you reduce the amount of worry. In other words, you could say it's maybe, right? Maybe it's possible in this context that the stuff you have could be robbing you of the life you want. I feel like that was pretty good, right? Like the stuff you have might be robbing from, might be stealing from you the life that you want. So instead of making investments in the things that you cannot keep, invest your life, your time, talent, and treasure in what you couldn't ever lose. Now, Jesus, for his part, I mean, he takes this thing to a whole nother level. And he fills that out and he says, therefore, I tell you, do not worry about what now? Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. And he's just kind of like cycling through like all of the stuff that he knows his people have been worrying about since day one. I mean, he could just go ahead and fill in all of your stuff too. And therefore, don't worry about the job. Don't worry about the kids. Don't worry about your career. Don't worry about the decision looming ahead of you. Don't worry about your lunch plans. Don't worry about your small group. Don't worry about your church. Don't worry about, and he's just like filling in all of the things that we lose sleep over, all of the things that we worry about all the time. Now, at this point in Jesus' teaching, before we go any further at all, we got to like push the hard brakes on this and identify and define what it is that Jesus is talking about when he's talking about worry. So I'll tell you, he's not saying not to worry in the sense of, don't worry about studying for that test. Don't worry about writing that paper. Don't worry about, he's not using worry in like a don't plan for the future kind of way. Don't worry about, saving up to get some new tires. Snow and ice isn't really that slippery anyway, right? He's not making a comment about planning for the future or not. He's not doing that. In the same way, he is definitely not talking about not worrying about what other people are going to eat or not eat. He's not saying don't worry about whether other people have clothes to wear or shoes to put on their feet when they're walking around. Right, so Christians, we don't have the luxury of sitting back and like turning on or flipping through Facebook or turning on TV, whatever, and like seeing one of those Compassion International ads with the poor kids who are starving, and it's like, can't you do something like $38 a month and you could change a kid's life? Like Christians, right? We cannot sit back then and say, well, Jesus said, don't worry about it. No. This teaching does not apply to other people, the person next to you, the person that you drove here with. It applies to you, and it applies to me. Christians do have a responsibility. Jesus will feed that kid, clad that kid. He's going to do it, chances are, through your generosity, my generosity. He's not talking about worrying about other people. He's not talking about planning for the future, and he's not talking about like clinically diagnosed anxiety disorders. So if you've got anxiety, is it panic attacks in your past and present right now? He's not saying, hey, that's on you. That's your fault. He's not saying don't go to the counselor or the therapist. He's not saying stop taking your medication. Although I think that what he does say for everybody, I think, is going to be tremendously helpful. He ups the ante now. And he says, this is why it's so helpful. Right? You've heard the joke, right, about the guy maybe who goes to the doctor, and he's like, doctor's like, hey, what brings you in? He's like, doc, you can't believe it. Like, it hurts so bad when I do this. And the doc like checks him out, and he's like, oh, well, just have you thought about not doing this? And it's like, thank you for that, doc, right? Thank you, Jesus, for that insightful comment about don't worry. Easier said than done. But Jesus goes, no. It's more than that. It's deeper than that, because it's not just doing this. There's actually so much more at stake. And he continues it on in the next line. He asks this rhetorical question. He says, is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Isn't life more than the stuff that you have to worry about? I mean, it's a simple question. Of course, life is more than that. But like when you start to dwell on that for just a second, it's like, wait a second, what is Jesus asking or what is he getting at here? I think he's making this insightful comment that when we worry about something, when we're anxious about something, when we think about something all of the time, what we're doing is we're actually making all of life and reducing it just down to that one thing. And he's saying it's possible that you're so dwelling on that one thing that you're going to miss life entirely. That'll just pass you right by because you're so focused on this. Example is when I have a decision to make. And I think it's the biggest decision in the world because it's the biggest decision in my world. And maybe it's a church thing. I can think of a couple things, a couple times in the past when I thought, hey, you know what? There's like this looming renovation or expansion or this capital campaign that's coming up, and I know it's just going to take an immense amount of time and planning, and I start thinking about that, and I get anxious about that all of the time, and it starts to like dwell and mount and grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then I know what happens. I go home at night, and I'm like sitting on the couch or on the floor, wherever, and I know physically I'm present, I'm there. I know that I'm physically present because my children are physically jumping on top of me, and it physically hurts, right? And they're like, Dad, come on, Dad, let's do this. Dad, let's play a game. Dad, Dad, are you paying attention to me? Dad, Dad. And it's just like, okay, it's all coming at me all at the same time, but I'm not there to receive it because mentally, emotionally, spiritually, I'm in this entirely different place. And I know that Jesus, if he were to audibly speak to me in that moment, he might ask me a question like this and go, Dirk, is it possible that maybe you've reduced your whole life and everything is in the moment that you're experiencing right now, and you're losing it, you're missing it, because you're so focused on this worry, on this thing over here, that right now in this moment, you actually can't do anything about. Isn't life about more than just that worry? It is. And if I'm not careful, it could take my life, your life, right out from under you. You see, the kind of worry that Jesus is talking about, it isn't other people's worry. It isn't planning for the future. The kind of worry that Jesus is talking about is the worry of where we actually get our word remember from. The word that he's using here is merimnao, is a Greek word that Matthew wrote down. It's connected to our word remember. And what Jesus is the kind of worry and anxious energy expenditure that he's talking about is the kind of worry or anxiety that remembers in the past or maybe looks ahead in the future in anticipation and takes all of the stress then and all of the stress forward and taking it from tomorrow, from yesterday, and locking it onto today, the present, right now. Borrowing something from tomorrow, borrowing something from yesterday's stress, and collapsing it on myself tomorrow, so the fact that I lose my life in the present all the time, because after all, we more or less exist in the present, at least we're meant to. So it's a little bit like, it's a funny, small example, but the best I could think of is when you go to a movie theater and you buy a ticket and they say, enjoy your show. And then instinctively you say, you too. And then you like walk away and you're like, stupid comment. Like, why did I say that every time? And then you like beat yourself up. Small, little, petty example. But it's like remembering that and the stress that caused, remembering that thing in your past, and then bringing that anxiety and bringing that stress up onto the present. And we do this with future stuff all of the time. It's the kind of worry Jesus is talking about, the kind of worry that if you're anxious about something and spending all this nervous energy on it, and somebody were to like pause you right there and say, tell me about the thing, and you told them all about the thing, and they said, what are you going to do about it today? Or what could you do about it right now? and you said, well, nothing. There's nothing I can do about it today, right now. That is the kind of worry that Jesus is talking about. That is the kind of worry that is going to rob you of life today. Isn't life more than about just that thing? And it's so easy to stay focused on just that thing. But Jesus, again, he doesn't just tell us not to. He starts to provide some answers and some clues, but it's going to get weirder before it gets clearer. In verse 26, we continue on. Because Jesus goes, look at the birds. Okay, I don't want to look at the birds. Old people look at the birds. My grandparents would look at the birds. Why am I looking at the birds? And he goes, no, pay attention. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. How much more valuable are you than the birds? Can any one of you, by worrying, this is a good question, add a single hour to your life? Like that nervous expenditure of anxious energy. By doing that, when you can't do anything, have you ever added value to your life by that? Have you ever added value to the lives of your loved ones by doing that? By dwelling on that? Have you ever added even an hour or two on your life? Better question, by spending your energy on that, by obsessing about this thing, have you ever lost hours to your life? And you're like, that's where we're on to something. Okay, you're with me. Look at the birds again. Birds don't even know how to store up for the future. The birds don't even know how to plan. The birds don't understand the law of the harvest. You pick what you plant. If you want to eat tomorrow, you got to work today. The birds don't even get that, yet they're fine. And God has blessed you with this incredible ability against all of creation to be able to look in the future and plan for it. How much more valuable are you than they are? And God, he cares so much more, even to the point of death, for you. And then he fills it out even more. He gets real scientific about the whole thing in verse 28, and he says, so why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They don't labor or spin, yet I tell you that not even Solomon was a king in ancient Israel's past. He was the most wealthy, most extravagant king Israel had ever had. And he goes, yet not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these flowers of the field. It's kind of a side point, but I just love to point it out because Jesus goes there and it tells us a little bit. Sometimes we think of Jesus as he would have his followers, his people, live this absolute minimalist Spartan lifestyle. That if we put anything on in the morning that's anything that's more extravagant than a garbage bag, then it's I think you're a little showy there, right? We think Jesus would have us reduce everything to just that. And this point, the fact that he goes to Solomon and he goes to the flowers of the field, which remember he made, he created, it shows us that God is the creator of the basic, but God is also the creator of the beautiful. Right? He doesn't shy away from nice things. He doesn't shy away from that extravagance. In fact, he says, I am, if you can believe it, the author of it all. So there's a little bit of a side point, but the bigger point within this whole thing is, extravagance and beauty is one thing. What if you magnify that? What if you blow that up? What if you make that huge? What if you make that all over the world, all over the universe? What if you have this idea of God that's all of a sudden so much bigger? I stumbled on this YouTube video. It's got 100 million, it had 40 million views then. I'm sure it's up to 100 million or something like that now. If you got to check it out. I thought about showing, but I'm I got 30 minutes and I got to be brief. So I'll just tell it to you. Google Yellowstone National Park wolves. And have anybody seen this thing? It's 2, 1, awesome, and me. Perfect. You won't have, Google it later. It's amazing. What happened in the 1950s? The government and the park officials, I should say, of Yellowstone removed the wolves out of Yellowstone National Park because they're wolves. And people wanted to camp there, et cetera. So they let the wolves leave. They moved them out of there. They did whatever, so there's no more wolves. what quickly happened, essentially immediately, is that the whole park, this massive thing, started sliding into like this desertification process, where essentially the rivers started drying up, the trees died and the shrubs started to disappear. Mice, rodents were gone. They left. They were essentially non-existent in all of Yellowstone. The whole park was sliding into just becoming this barren wilderness, just this desert. And then some researchers in 1995 reintroduced wolves into the park's ecosystem, and everything started to change. Because what had happened is the deer and elk were eating all of the shrubs, which would erode the banks of the rivers, and then the rivers wouldn't flow, so they'd just stay stagnant and dry up, and everything was starting to die. But when the wolves started eating the deer and the elk, they scattered into the woods and wouldn't hang out in open areas anymore, and so the trees and the shrubs could come back. The rivers had now banks to them that kept them flowing. Beavers came to dam it up, creating these mini lakes, which poured into more trees, more shrubs, more bushes. The animals, the rodents, and the mice came back. They nibbled on the little berries that went into their stomach. The mice ran to other areas of the park and did whatever happens after the digestive process is finished, and those seeds and berries came out again, creating even more plants and trees and shrubs and more rivers and more. And the whole park, 20 years from this reintroduction of just the wolves, the whole park started flourishing again. And park officials looked at this and said, the entire landscape of the park, quote, had been transformed. I share this whole thing, not to just sell Yellowstone or YouTube, but it's a great video. But to show how complicated this system is and how intricate nature is. It's why I love that song, So Will I, so much, because it points to a God who is so big. And you think about the precarious balance of all of these ecosystems just in one park, and you multiply that across the whole planet, and you multiply that across the entire universe, and you look at this God behind it all who made it and sustains it, and you start to look at a God like that and say, He's huge, and He cares about you. And hopefully, we look at a God like that and say, if you can make and sustain something like that, you are worthy of my trust. Even when I'm tempted to hand my trust over to my fears and anxious energy, worry, I trust you, God, because you're worthy. And then Jesus, he does one of these kitchen table kind of conversations where he looks at us. He goes, now I want to tell you the real root of the issue here, because it isn't just about worry. He says in verse 30, if that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he not much more clothe you? And here it is, you of little faith. You see, what Jesus is saying right now is he's connecting the two. And he's saying the anxious worry that we have, it isn't just a stress management issue. There's an element to this thing where it's a spiritual issue as well. This thing, it's because your God is so small, and your worry and your anxiousness is so big that there's no way that your God could ever take the amount of stress and the amount of worry that you have. And we focus so much on trying to reduce down the amount of stress or the amount of anxiety or worry in our lives, but we totally miss the fact that Jesus is pointing out that your God is so very small, he could never handle the amount of worry that you have. And so there's one element of like, hey, we can talk about some self-help stuff, about shrinking down the amounts of worry, but maybe we got to talk about the theological issue that your God is so small. And you could put this in another simple way and say simply that the place where you worry the most, that thing that keeps you up at night most about, the place where you worry the most is where you actually trust God the least. The area of your most worry is the area where you least trust. And so you could spend time on this, but don't neglect this. And chances are that's probably why you're here this morning, is to hear about that. So, verse 31, Jesus continues, don't worry, saying, what should we eat, or what should we drink, or what should we wear? And he goes, verse 32, the pagans run after these things. And he means pagans as not like this derogatory insult of like, the pagans are real godless for Joe over there. You know? He's not making a comment about like derogatory. 99% of the population was pagans. You're either Jewish or a Jewish Christian, or you're a Roman Greek pagan. That's kind of how it worked. And the pagans believed in the pantheon of gods, Apollo, the god of war, or Venus, the goddess of love, or Jupiter, the goddess over God over all of them, right? Like, but those gods were so concerned with themselves and their own affairs, they didn't care about anybody else. And so the pagans are running after them. And he goes, Jesus continues on, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. So you're not like the pagans, because those gods don't know or care about the people that follow after them, but your God knows, and your God cares about you. Some of you just need to hear that this morning, even if your God is tiny. Compared to your worry and your anxious expenditure of energy, you just need to hear the voice of God whisper into your heart, I know about this. I know what's inside of this. I think that's so much a part of this whole deal is simply the fact that we don't know, we don't think that God knows. And so if you could have this spiritual experience where you're praying and you're offering up all of these worries, and God could just speak in and you could hear audibly the voice of God simply tell you, not that he's going to do anything, not that he's going to fix everything, but just that he knows. If God could just tell me that he knows, everything would be so much better. He did. It's in the Bible. God himself literally wrote down or had people write down, your heavenly Father knows. He just told you. It's in black and white. Or if you have a fancy Bible, it's in red on white. He told you, I know. What else are you waiting for? The pagans run after these things, but you, verse 33, seek first his kingdom, his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Church, this blew my mind earlier. Okay, this is like one of those. I preached on seek first his kingdom, his righteousness, right? Like, preached on that a bunch of times. And that's good stuff. That's good stuff. The context of that, so much better. Get this, because this is, earlier this week, it was like one of those, I was today years old when I realized this, okay? Like, so much. Okay. When Jesus says that pagans run after these things because nobody else cares, but Christians, Jesus followers, ought to seek first this thing, his kingdom, his righteousness, God's kingdom, God's righteousness. Get this. The word that he uses for chase after and seek first is the same word. It's used a little bit differently with a different prefix, but essentially Jesus is like lining it all up and saying, you've got a couple ways to live. You can chase after this, or you can seek first this. What are you going to do? And the pagans, they chase after this because nobody else is looking out for them. So they have to know how it's all going to come together, how the plan is going to happen, how the answers are going to be found. They have to know how because they don't have a who that's ever going to look out for them But Jesus says, you're different. Because you don't have to know the how when you've got a who. It sounds a little like a Dr. Seuss book. I get that. Maybe it'll be memorable. There's an inside joke around here. That I have got a guy for everything. If you need anything done, I got a guy for you. A guy, might be a lady, might be a business, might be an internet website. It doesn't matter. I got a guy. You got a sign fixed? I got a guy. You need 1,000 chairs delivered next week at a great price? I got a guy. It's Aaron. And I'll give you a number. You can call him. I got a guy. I don't know how. Listen, I call up Aaron. I don't know how 1,000 chairs are going to happen, are going to appear. I don't know how they were stored. I don't know how they're going to get picked up. I don't know how they're going to be delivered. I don't know how they're going to disappear when I put them on the lawn when I'm done with them. I have no idea how. But it doesn't matter because I got a who. I know a who. Now, when you start applying this to God and think like, wow, I have so many questions and so much worry and anxiety and stress about the future, it doesn't matter. I don't need a how because I've got a who. And when we start focusing less on chasing after the how, because we don't even need the how, we don't even need to know how it all happens because we've got a who. When we start to focus on the who and let go of the how, I'll tell you what happens is that the worries and God starts to get a whole lot bigger and the worries start to get a whole lot smaller. And when we focus on His kingdom, His righteousness, the who, He's big enough. He's worthy. He's so worthy of your trust. If you've got something that you're worried about and you're spending all of this anxious energy, we have a prayer team set up in back. We would love to introduce you to the who of all creation, the who that's got this, so that you and I, we don't have to know how. Let's pray together. Gracious God, you have resurrected your Son. And when you show conquering death like you did, when you show hope even against the backdrop of complete and utter darkness, God, we know that you have our tomorrows. You know that tomorrow is going to bring all kinds of stress and all kinds of worry and all kinds of anxious expenditure of energy. But God, you've got tomorrow. You've got tomorrow in the palm of your hands, and you've got every day after that, God. Show us how to trust you. Reveal to us in a new way, in a powerful way, I pray this morning, that you are completely and utterly worthy of the trust that we have to give. Jesus, it's in your resurrected name we pray.